This past spring, Oakland Theatre Project produced a one-person version of Assassins, the multi-Tony Award-winning musical with a book by John Weidman and music and lyrics by Stephen Sondheim. The musical originally premiered off-Broadway in 1990. Our production was directed by Weston Scott and performed by Adam KuveNiemann, and it was a smashing success. Unique in every aspect, this contemporary interpretation matched a revelatory form with extraordinary material that remains uncannily relevant. In the process of seeking approval for our bold approach to this beloved musical, we were able to engage directly with John Weidman and the Sondheim estate. After seeing a video of the production here in Oakland, John graciously agreed to join Wes, Adam, and me for a conversation about the musical, his career, theater, art, and everything in between. Wes and Adam are extraordinary artists in their own right, and Assassins has long been a dream show for both of them. The opportunity to speak with three-time Tony Award nominee John Weidman was, without exaggeration, a dream come true. It was an extraordinary gift to receive John's and the Sondheim estate's permission to produce the musical in the way we did, and another gift to get to speak with John about his work, our production of Assassins, and the future of theater. I hope you enjoy the conversation. So, for anyone listening, we've already had a wonderful podcast unrecorded. So John, maybe you can, if you're willing, maybe actually before the proposal to Steve about Assassins, can you just share how you met him, like how you two connected?
Yes, I've had a lot of luck in my life. I went to college in the '60s, and I had to deal with military service when I graduated. The war in Vietnam was still really happening, very intense. People made decisions about whether they wanted to participate. If not, there were other options that were available that would get you deferment. I was going to join the Peace Corps. I didn't. I wound up teaching elementary school in New York for a bunch of years. And then I went to law school, not because I particularly wanted to, but because I was the way I think a lot of people at that time did. I was kind of putting one foot in front of the other, waiting to see what my life was going to be like. I mean, it's the '60s, guys. What can I say, right? It was mostly about, the rock and roll and a certain amount of marijuana and whatever else went with that. And so I wound up in law school when I was able to go. And I actually liked law school a lot. I went to Yale, which was at the time was sort of the law school which came closest to being a kind of public policy school as any place else. So that kind of paper chase stuff where you stand up and get barked at by the professor was minimal. But after a couple of years, I thought I liked law school, but I really don't want to be a lawyer. I had this sort of obligatory summer job as an attorney. And so I had to figure out what I could do, what else I might do. And, I had never had any ambitions to be a writer, particularly a writer for the theater. On the other hand, I've been going to the theater my whole life. And I thought, well, if I have a yellow legal pad and a pen and a typewriter, I can write a play. And, my dad was a novelist and quite a successful one, but he'd worked in the theater for 3 or 4 years. And as I said, I'd been going to the theater my whole life. Not with, as I said, with an eye on making a career in the theater, but who wouldn't want to go to the theater, right? That was sort of my attitude. So I did the kind of thing that, doesn't even, in retrospect, make a whole lot of sense. But I sat down in the Yale Law School library and I wrote a play with no experience, no training. But I know what a play looked like on the page. You would type the name of the character who was going to speak in capital letters, and then you would hit the return bar on a typewriter, guys. You can look that, you can Google that, okay, if you want to find out what that was. And then you typed what the character said, and then you hit the return bar twice, and you kept doing that till you got to the end. And I had in college, I done something which was unusual at the time, which was to major in East Asian studies, East Asian history, because I'd gone to a very good high school, and nobody ever mentioned Asia, China, or Japan at all, really. And suddenly I was in college, and I thought, well, I had to take a survey course outside the area in which I thought I was going to major. I took the survey course in Chinese and Japanese history, and it's kind of thrilling. So when it was time to write a play, I thought, why don't I reach in this bag filled with knowledge that other people don't have? And I wrote a straight play about Commodore Perry's expedition to open up Japan in 1853. And I was able to get the play to Hal Prince, so I'd met when I was a little kid, because my dad had done a show with him, but I didn't know whether he would remember who I was. And he really liked it and decided he would produce it. So this is the first thing I had ever written, and all of a sudden I'm taking the train in from New Haven for like auditions for this play. After a couple months, Hal decided it didn't want to be a play, it wanted to be a musical. And I thought that just meant he was saying he wasn't going to do my play on Broadway, which made complete sense to me. It's like he'd come to his senses. But he really thought it should be a musical. And, he talked to Steve about it, and I was told later on, Steve thought, yeah, it's really interesting. Feels like maybe a play with music, but Hal was nothing if not persuasive. And so he kind of talked Steve into a collaboration, which then, produced Pacific Overtures. So that was it. That was the beginning of the career, which has led me to this conversation. And that's it. I mean, Steve and I think we just, well, I don't think, I mean, we liked each other, and, we remained good friends, going forward through all the shows that we worked on, but even when we weren't working on a show. But Steve became the logical person to go to when I had kind of an eccentric idea. And that was the case with Assassins, although I had gone to him with a completely different idea, which was about the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. He said, I think that sounds like a movie. What about Assassins? What do you mean? And we just started to meet every week talking about it until, we wound up with real clarity about what we were writing. I think it's at some point, I was in high school when Kennedy was shot. And in a lot of ways, my grandparents were alive. I mean, it was my first emotional experience of loss. All that Camelot stuff was real if you were a kid. And I went down, we were living in New York. I went down to DC. I stood on the sidewalk, watched the funeral cortege go by. And at a certain point while Steve and I were talking, I thought, oh, we're writing about who killed JFK. And it wasn't about conspiracy theories about the Cubans. It wasn't about conspiracy theories about the CIA. It was about some larger idea that it would be useful to write about, because if we were persuaded ourselves and it gave people something to think about, it might actually lead to a different way of thinking about grievance and violence in America that might, well, as I said, leave an audience with something to chew on that might lead to something more useful than, again, the endless pawing over the facts of, what the CIA might have or might not have been doing that had played some role in Kennedy's assassination. So, I believe the show is an answer to that question. Who killed John F. Kennedy? And there it is, for people to make of it what they will.
John, I'm sort of curious. Like, I feel like in a lot of your work, certainly your work with Stephen Sondheim, I feel like there's a really like form pushing element to it, and I guess I wonder. It's just interesting hearing you talking about like going to law school. I feel like there's like such a kinship between lawyers and writers, just in the craft and appreciation of words and of wordsmithery, but I feel like your work is not just like word craft. It's not just like, oh, I can put words together well. There's also a frame, a form that, and I know, of course, in his book and look, I Made a Hat, Sondheim writes about content dictates form is one of his clarion calls. But what is that drives you for the sort of form?
Well, that, and, Assassins is probably, the best example of what Steve was talking about there. I mean, we invented a form for the piece, and the invention was driven by what we wanted the piece, in terms of its content, to deliver. I mean, I can't actually think of another show that is structured the way Assassins is, and I can't imagine writing another show that would mimic that structure. It felt like, you got to group of people who are usually thought of as being kind of somehow existing outside the American experience as idiosyncratic loners. They have nothing in common with anybody else, and that explodes into an act of violence at the end of somebody else's life and at the end of their lives. And that felt like it meant the piece should honor that in the beginning. You could gather everybody together, but they're not really interested in each other. They're kind of in the same scene, but they're on stage together, but they're not talking to each other. And then you kind of hold them in that space and let them each have their individual moment, and let kind of a second moment actually lead to an attack on the president. And after they've each had that kind of individual attention, they kind of look at each other and go, wait a minute, you know what? I'm actually a little bit like you, aren't I? And you're a little bit like me. And that gets us to, another national anthem and then off to Texas. So the structure of the piece was totally driven by what we thought about the people we were writing about.
John, how does it feel that, because before we were recording, you were sort of asking us what drew us to the piece, but I'm wondering how it feels to see this piece recur again and again and have, like, I don't know, and just as an artist to have a piece that has this sort of life and staying power.
Well, it's a good question. The piece, there have been significant productions of the piece periodically ever since it was first done. For a period of time, nobody did it. It was Sam Mendes did it in London the year after it opened in New York, and they loved it in London as much as they didn't like it here. But for about 12 years, it was done on college campuses and in small theaters, but professional companies didn't want to touch it. They were afraid of it. And then Joe Mantello did a production at Playwrights Horizons that won a lot of Tony Awards, which was an odd experience, receiving a Tony Award after the first production. I was afraid to leave the house without wearing Groucho glasses for fear that somebody would attack me for having written a book for this hateful musical. But that sort of changed everything. And then other people really became interested in exploring the piece. And there have been a lot of really good productions since then. So with this particular show, it felt like it's been very satisfying to see the piece, which was so misunderstood at the beginning, be embraced by a whole variety of different kinds of theaters and people who make theater. I think the fact that it still feels as relevant as it does. The last time I saw it, even when I was watching you do it, Adam, it felt like, oh, we wrote it yesterday, and on the one hand, that's really satisfying. If you're an artist, you want to create something that speaks to audiences over time. But given the way this piece speaks to audiences, that relevance is satisfying, but it's troubling, I guess is a word I would use. Do you know?
Yeah. Something that came to mind listening to you, John, is you and it's funny to call him Steve because to me he's Stephen Sondheim.
Mr. Sondheim.
Yeah, Monsieur.
Call him anything you want. He can't come after you. Well, I don't know. He's, in
his work.
Well, the guy who wrote Sweeney Todd, maybe right behind you right now, looking over your shoulder.
There.
Yes, I think I'll withdraw what I said. Anyway, go ahead.
Like talking every week and coming up with it, and we were saying before that for this production, Adam and Wes, have been best friends now for, I don't know, over a decade or so, and that a lot of this just came out of friendship, like a kind of flow that I don't trust is a big part of it, but intimacy too. Like there's just a sort of ongoing nature to it, and I'm wondering if both of you, John and Wes and Adam, like all of you, you could just kind of talk about. I know they're very different creative things. Writing a musical is different than directing it and acting in it, but it's a similar energy, I think.
I can say, I'll go first. When Steve and I first collaborated on Pacific Overtures, Hal Prince, was sort of the hub of a wheel, and all the creative work went through Hal, and that was typical of all the shows that Steve did with Hal at that time. They were referred to, and I guess they still are, as sort of the Prince Sondheim musicals. the book writers are over there someplace. And, if you look at the book that Hugh Wheeler wrote for Sweeney Todd, it's brilliant. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
but they were still called, Prince Sondheim musicals. When we did Assassins, like I said, we had been looking for something to work on together, but I wound up in Steve's study and something sparked us in different ways about this idea. And so there was then a kind of an intimacy is a good word. We would meet every week with no agenda, and just talk. We were completely comfortable, saying anything. There was no sense of, am I going to sound stupid? We were just very comfortable with each other. And that was necessary in order for the show to evolve into what it eventually became. And it was interesting. We did almost no rewriting. Steve wrote an alternate song for Unworthy of Your Love at one point, just as a kind of an experiment in a different style of a different band at the time. And the first time we had a reading, basically we read the script as written. I had a couple of scenes in it which I took out, but there was something about the way we connected with each other. You guys can speak to this, that just got us where we needed to go. And I think one thing that was important is that we didn't start writing anything until we felt like we had sort of we were totally in the same place, on the same page, not to just pluck a metaphor out of the air. But so that when it was time for each of us to go off and do our own thing, it felt like we were kind of one voice, one writer. The third show that we did, Roadshow, went through a whole lot of a lot of changes and rewrites and different productions. And I think that's because we were in a little bit of a hurry. And so we started writing before we knew exactly what it was. We thought we'd figure it out as we wrote. Nobody ever articulated that, but that was kind of the idea. And that made it all much more difficult in terms of getting to the finish line. But the relationship was, I've never worked with anybody with whom I felt as comfortable as I did with Steve.
Wow. Yeah. Like half of the work with me and Adam is saying the dumbest ideas possible and just seeing like what sticks and what will like eventually turn into like the nugget of something. Speaking of Sweeney, Adam and I met doing a production of Sweeney Todd when we were in college. Adam played Judge Turpin and I was assistant stage manager, who was the voice of Toby for one night when Toby's voice went out.
May I just say, that was a remarkable performance because Wes did the speaking voice of Toby. The actor was on stage, no voice. Wes did the voice of the actor for the scenes, and the adult man music director did the singing voice. So during one of the songs, it was like, no, this is his purse, Mrs. Lovett. 2 quid was in it, 2 or 3. 2 quid couldn't be him.
I hope there's a recording of this someplace that you guys.
Oh, I hope. I hope it's been burned. Is what I hope. But Adam and I. So, when I heard this idea from Michael, we were literally at a wedding in October, and we just spent the whole wedding talking about theater and dancing on the dance floor. So when this idea entered my head, and once Adam was brought on board, we were talking about this show constantly. Adam has 2 children. But if I texted him, like, have an idea for Assassins, Adam would, I guess, drop his children and just call me right away.
So they'd fall on the ground, blink away.
Yeah. Kate was 4 at the time, about to turn 5. She could catch herself.
Yeah.
But it was a constant process. When we got to the rehearsal room, we were like, oh, we haven't done any table work. And it's like, oh, we've been doing table work for 3 months. Just going through these 18 scenes, figuring out what's going to be best, figuring out what Adam could do best. We had so many versions of the show. There was a version where it was like going to be a bunch of mirrors, and Adam was just going to be like doing things with mirrors, which would have been cool. And then we started playing with this camera and figuring out what we could do with that. So for us, it was a straight 3-month period of Adam and I talking only about Assassins with each other, like throwing everything to the wall, thinking about what would be great. And we'd also, like, this is not to say, we've been talking about Assassins for years before this. Like, this is not the first time we'd ever considered Assassins. It's like, not even thinking about doing the show, just like talking about the show, what we dug about it. I had my cassette tape of the original cast recording of Assassins that was in my car. I have a very strong memory of Adam and I. So we were in the Bay Area. He was driving down to LA for an audition, and I was going to be staying in LA. So we're like driving in the middle of the night down the 5 freeway, and Adam wanted to listen to the cassette tape of Passion on this drive. And I'm like, Adam, we're not listening to Passion together on this drive. We're not just sitting silent for this 2-hour musical. But we did put Assassins on during that ride. And the entire time, I don't even think we said anything. We're just like, man, this show's so cool. The entire time.
Sounds like us.
It is, because of the way it was initially received, I think it really has taken people a long time to catch up with the fact, and maybe they haven't even yet, with what an extraordinary score Steve wrote.
Oh yeah,
the collection of songs is breathtaking, and it's the variety and the wit in them, and it's funny. It's back to the idea of intimacy and collaboration. It's like, Steve and I. This was one of those projects where nobody ever had to say, to protect themselves, say, look, I know this is a really stupid idea, but it's like you just forget that part and just say what the idea is. Do you know what I mean? But I wrote the 2 monologues for Sam Bick, and we knew what the structure was and where they were going to where they landed. And I remember Steve and I had a conversation. He said, the sort of the predictable thing to do here would be let the first monologue be a spoken piece, and then when we come back to him, turn it into a song. But he said, I think they work as these kind of arias as is, and my instinct is to leave them alone. And the same was true of I wrote the scene in the Texas School Book Depository, having set aside the idea that, hey, it's a musical, so let's make sure this is being constructed in a way that will build to some kind of a number, whatever it is. And, when I finished it, we both looked at it, and Steve said, I don't think there's a song in this. I think it just wants to be this sort of argument on Booth's part. And, we caught a real break, with the recording of the original cast off Broadway.
Yeah.
Because who remembers this stuff? But it's like, I guess there was a certain amount of space on a CD, and you couldn't have more than that. And it was a problem if you had a lot less than that. And the songs didn't fully occupy whatever recorded space needed to be filled. And it was a guy named Jay Sachs who produced the album, said, why don't we do the last scene as a kind of radio play?
Oh, man.
Yeah. And that's how it happened. And it was, first of all, it was enormously satisfying to me because, we've got Victor Garber and this collection of amazing actors, captured forever. But it also meant that for people who didn't know the show, hadn't seen it, but for them to get some sense of what we were after, what we were trying to achieve, having that scene there, I think, made a huge difference. And but that was one of those lucky moments where, like I said, it wasn't my idea, it wasn't Steve's idea, it was the producer.
As someone that encountered the show first I first encountered it because I learned about Sondheim's books, Look, I Made a Hat, finishing the Hat and Look, I Made a Hat, which I only got when I was in high school because he was on the Colbert Report, and Stephen Colbert, which I watched regularly in high school, and Stephen Colbert, it was the only time I saw him break character. He couldn't be his character around Stephen Sondheim because he was too amazed, and I was like, "This guy's important." So then my dad, who used to perform opera, so like had an appreciation for these things, but like didn't know that I was interested. He was like, "Oh yeah," and he bought those books. So I kind of approached it from like a strangely literary beginning of reading a lot of his lyrics. And so then I would listen. I would like read a bunch of the stuff and read his essays about theater, and then I would listen to the cast recordings. So I listened to the Assassins cast recording, and it was like, because that scene was recorded, I could get a better sense, though not a complete sense. I realized later when I actually got to read the full scenes and realized, oh my God, these are just the fullness of the expression of the show. But like by having that scene in there, I got a sense of what it was, and I always assumed it was because otherwise people who listen to the cast recording would be like, "Where's Oswald?" Like if you're going through, you're going like, "Oh, da 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 da," and then if you just didn't have a song, he's the only one that doesn't have a song other than Bick, but then he's got the monologue recorded.
Yeah.
So then, so I was like, people would be like, "Where's Oswald?"
No, it's very funny. That wasn't it, but it does. I mean, when we did the show in 1990, 91, I guess, our assumption was that the people came into what they would bring into the theater with them was the idea of John Wilkes Booth and the idea of Lee Harvey Oswald, and nobody else. And maybe, I mean, the Ford assassination attempts were recent history, so maybe, but Charles Gosh, all that stuff, no. And so that one of the tricks we realized we had to try and pull off was to structure the show and give it a kind of momentum so that people would forget about Lee Harvey Oswald. They would forget they knew about Lee Harvey Oswald, so that somehow when the show went to Texas, and you could, even in the first production, audiences either loved it or wished there was intermission so they wouldn't have to, they could get out of there. The audiences would gasp, and sometimes the gasping was like, they're not going to do this to me. They're not going to. Don't take me there. I don't want to go there. Because one of the things that's interesting about the show, if you're me, given when it was written and when it first appeared, was that we could count on the fact in 1991 that most people in the audience would have had some personal experience of the Kennedy assassination, and that gave the scene a particular tone. And it connected to the audience in a particular way. Now, that's not true anymore. And, there was a really good production at Classic Stage that John Doyle directed, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. COVID was involved. And you could feel the fact that most of the audience, their emotions were not stirred by the idea of Lee Harvey Oswald and the Kennedy assassination. It had it was more present than some of the older ones, but it was still occupied a very different place. And the fact that the show works as well as it does despite that change is very satisfying to me, because it really had felt to me when we wrote it like, as I said, it's about who killed President Kennedy. And when you got to that scene, the audience was going to have to, whether they wanted to or not, they were going to have to grapple with that.
It's really...
Oh, go ahead. No,
I was just going to say that's really interesting you bring that up, because I feel like for Wes and me, one of the guiding questions was, who is the person or persons, the people who have attempted to kill Trump, or the person who killed Charlie Kirk, or the person who there's so many people. This recurring phenomenon of assassination, where it's like that for me is the baggage I'm coming in with of assassins. That I'm thinking about, that then, at least the way we were framing it, I was thinking about, well, I know that it would be Lee Harvey Oswald, and it still is Lee Harvey Oswald, but it's almost like the wallop is of, but what about today? Which I think we also, I mean, in this production, you can't really escape that. It's kind of everywhere is what about today?
Yeah.
But that's sort of the guiding thing that's like...
Yeah.
No, and I think, I mean, the real muscle behind where you guys started the show is exactly that. I mean, I'm not surprised that people text you and said, "Oh shit,"
Yeah.
This is. I bought a ticket to be in the basement with this guy for an hour and a half. Great,
Yeah.
But it does, it's what I'm going to call I want to choose my words carefully. I mean, the Oswald scene has got. They're not jokes, but there is humor in the scene.
Yes.
It's very dark, but it was meant to extend the discomfort which the audience was feeling as they were looking at these two guys figure out their relationship. So they didn't want to just be, Booth's the smartest guy in the show, right?
Oh, easy.
And that he would use a certain kind of morbid wit to kind of work on Oswald made complete sense to me. And so it's there, but again, in a recent production, there's some things in the scene that get a larger laugh now than I'm comfortable with, but that's just means it's 30 years have passed, People they're just more comfortable with that awful moment, in Texas. You said, Adam, you said you've got a couple of kids. I also have a couple of kids. I have 3 grandchildren too. But I took my daughter, who I guess was 9, to see Assassins because I thought, I don't know. I mean, what? I don't know. I mean, either I'll be arrested for child abuse or we'll have something to talk about. And when it was over,
what do you think? That's good.
What'd you think? She said, I think it's good, but there's too much cursing. So it was that was the one thing that she had a problem with was the line. I said, yeah, there is a lot. You're right. And then we did something else. But
Sam Bick, come on.
I mean, what are you going to do? It's interesting. I don't know if you guys, what kind of research you did. The show doesn't really. I feel like the show doesn't require research. It's like what you need to know about everybody is on the page. But I'm finding out more about these characters is irresistible, I think, to any actor who's playing these parts, right? Who wouldn't want to?
Yeah.
And, there is a tape. You can listen to Bick's tape as he was driving to the airport. And that's not our Sam Bick. That's a different Sam Bick.
Yeah.
It's a very slow, depressed guy, I've discussed this often over the years, but Steve and I both felt like we did a significant amount of research about who these characters were, then we made them up, which is, of course, is what you do. And, when it was time to make up Sam Bick, I just thought he loved being buddies with Leonard Bernstein until it turns out there's something behind that that's not so entertaining, Anyway.
I did listen to the tapes and I did enjoy the research, and I also felt, well, this is not particularly helpful. Maybe I'll focus on something else here. It is incredibly interesting. Pretty much every one of these characters, and one thing that you mentioned, sometimes writing in the songs and how underappreciated the score is for the show. Also, just the inclusion of the historical facts, but in such a dynamic and fluid way, you barely even notice, but then you actually research it, and then there's like, oh, that throwaway line about couldn't fill his brother's shoes. I actually read a whole book about Edwin Booth and the Booth family, and it's incredibly fascinating. And we don't get to spend any time with it, but it's all like siphoned down. It's great.
One of the things that Steve was really proud of was the fact that the Admiral's number, Please Hello, in Pacific Overtures.
Yeah.
The Admirals arrive from in the right order from the right countries, and the demands they make are the actual historical demands that each. I mean, it's like to be able to deliver that through Gilbert and Sullivan. It's wild. But Steve was scrupulous about that.
Yeah.
No, Adam will research anything, any throwaway line. I had to hear so much about Artie Bremer, who is a fascinating individual. But I do just want to say, Adam does this for every show. He did a play where he was playing William Inge. I heard so much about William Inge. He did this for A Christmas Carol. He read A Christmas Carol, and then he texted me. He's like, "Hey, A Christmas Carol is a really good book." And I'm like, "You don't say." That the entire culture has agreed on that one.
And thank you, Michael, for making sure this is the first time that Wes was hired to do this rather than all the other times where Wes is just the repository for my
pro bono
dramaturgy
work.
that's not particularly exciting to even many people in the process. I'm like, I got to tell Wes about this.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think if I believe what I'm about to say. I do. I'll stick to it. I mean, Steve and I have tried to be scrupulous about all the facts. I mean, when Cholgas describes his job in the bottle factory, he did work in a bottle factory. I mean, and in fact, Sarah Jane Moore did work in a 7-Eleven, which kids from the high school that was being attended by Charlie Manson would stop after school to get. So she never, I'm confident she and Charlie Manson never acknowledged or did anything other than, did she actually break a dollar bill for him at some point? I don't know, but it was enough that it could have happened. So it's like, it's not a complete invention. Right? Any more than Booth showing up in the Texas School Book Depository is.
Yeah.
But also, if Sarah Jane Moore were making a complete invention, that seems in her character, at least